God, I love the Terran music. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Project Starcraft. I almost forgot who I am, casting a TVT on Tal'Darim Altar, one of my favorite maps, and one of my favorite mirror matchups, so hopefully we're in for a treat. Spawning in the top right-hand corner on Tal'Darim Altar, we have our Terran bad guy. We have TheRedDeath. And spawning in our bottom left-hand position on the same map, we have in the blue trunks our hero from Reddit r/castit. We have Fluffyjr, who on Reddit just goes by Fluffy. So we might utilize a little bit of both of that. So the reason why I like Tal'Darim Altar is just it's so big. You have quite a bit of space in your main base. You've got a pretty small choke that leads into a natural. The natural is huge and very difficult to utilize walls to ramp off. You've got a third that is covered by destructible rocks, and a natural fourth that's close by air. So there's 4 Zelnaga watchtowers in the middle of the map that cover quite a bit of space. So it's very important to utilize those if there's any kind of control. Now, right when we get to 12 food, we see TheRedDeath taking an early gas, so it looks like he's going to be utilizing a more tech-oriented build as he decides to place down his barracks at about 13 supply. Fluffy, our hero, doing a more traditional build. He's getting about 12 racks and 13 gas, and sending out his 14th SCV to, looks like, to scout or get set up. I love the Terran music. I love it. It's awesome. I guess the one thing I really wish I would do to switch to Terran is because I love the music. I wish I could just select Terran music whenever I play, because I mean the Zerg music has those underlying tones, and it's like a violent beat to it, and the Protoss is their auras and shit. But as a Protoss player, I want to fall asleep every time I play this game. Fluffy getting his orbital command slightly before TheRedDeath, as TheRedDeath decided to get gassed a little bit earlier. And he's got pretty well timed, actually getting the getting the factory down right when gas was done, but Fluffy's inevitable scout delayed that slightly. So we'll see that go. We'll see how TheRedDeath's opening goes. Now the thing is that he's continuing to mine gas, so he's either utilizing an early marine tank kind of push timing, or he's utilizing to get gas, or utilizing it to maybe get banshees or something else. Now we see TheRedDeath scout not being able to see a whole lot, but it looks like he's getting a factory of his own. But he's also taking guys off gas, so it looks like we're going to see a Marine Hellion opening coming from Fluffy. But it looks like we're going to see a more tech-oriented play from TheRedDeath. So throwing down a reactor on the barracks, so I wonder if we're going to see Marine Hellion from both players, just a different variety or a different style. So if they're both doing Marine Hellion, let's see who actually wins. Now, TheRedDeath is actually taking a second gas, so this might be planned in order to actually climb the tech tree a little bit more, as we see an additional starport being put down. Fluffy actually being a little bit more conservative and actually expanding. We see TheRedDeath popping down some Marines down. Looks like he's going to be taking that watchtower to see if there's any kind of pesky drops or any kind of ground play coming. We see some Hellions being built, but with a impending supply block from both players, it looks like we'll be able to get up into the next step of the game here shortly. Clutch scan coming down from TheRedDeath. Perfect scouting, ladies and gentlemen. I love my Terran brothers. Fluffy getting a little nervous and deciding to put down a barracks, or a bunker, excuse me, just to be able to make sure that nothing bad happens. Now we see a transition. What's going to be done? So we see the starport land attached to that tech lab, and we see a Banshee started. So it looks like we're going to see some Hellion Banshee play. Some really interesting stuff going on. Fluffy driving out a Hellion to the watchtower just to kind of chase away that pesky Marine. And it should be able to do it. And one more shot. Boom. See 2 Hellions coming down from TheRedDeath. And TheRedDeath actually expanding, so a bit slightly behind. Utilizing to get a little bit farther along the tech path before deciding to expand. We see an engagement down. TheRedDeath utilizing some micro, making sure that Fluffy's Hellion can't be able to line both up, and one Hellion gets taken down by the Marine surround that's happening. So He sees it out there. He doesn't see that the expansion happened quite yet, but he's probably got a pretty good idea that Fluffy's setting up for an expand. Going to the unit counter station, we have 25 SCVs for the Red Death and 28 for our Reddit hero Fluffy. But we also have a Banshee out already on the field, so... Red Death being very interesting with utilizing his play. He builds one Banshee. That's all he's building with this, and he actually places the factory back down, so he has a reactor barracks, a factory that's researching siege mode, and he's building additional barracks. So it looks like we're transitioning into a Marine tank, maybe medevac and Viking kind of play. And Fluffy being a little bit more standard. Doesn't have any reactors or any kind of additional add-ons to his bases quite yet, but he's got a Viking out, so Fluffy would be able to chase away this impending Banshee without too much trouble. Now the one indicator of a good high-level player is that the player will actually maximize his vision of his base by building different units around. As we see the engagement right here, this Banshee being able to take out a couple different workers right here, actually taking out 2 mules and an SCV and getting shot down. And I'm not really sure that's worth it. I mean, killing mules are always good, but, you know, Banshee should be used for harass. You see that Viking there, you GTFO. You don't stick around for what might happen. Now, it looks like both players are doing their own little version of Marine Tank Viking, but Red Death actually adding on an additional factory, so it looks like he's really wanting to amp up the amount of siege tanks that he can do. We see a tech lab going down, an additional barracks and reactor, so really getting those upgrades and really pushing out those Marines. Engineering bay going down for Fluffy, just getting that missile turret in the base, and actually adding an additional factory of his own. So it's interesting that both players are doing slightly different things, but they're using it to achieve the same goal of Marine Tank Viking, pretty much. We see a small engagement going here, and with a little bit of micro, Fluffy is able to slightly get away, but Red Death's Hellions are able to actually sneak away from here. So Fluffy actually taking the long way around, see what kind of information he can get, and he sees 2 siege tanks and a scan down there, trying to see what kind of army is there, and Fluffy doesn't see much. Now Fluffy taking an interesting approach, actually getting pre-igniter or infernal pre-igniter. I'm so awful with my names tonight. Utilizing that to amp up the potential damage output of his Hellions. Red Death starting his Marine upgrades by getting combat shields. We see kind of a passivity from both players, both trying to amp up, get what they want to do. It's interesting what they'll do. Red Death putting some siege tanks down here so he can sit up and take his third, but he has no other map control. If we see Fluffy, it looks like he's pushing out a little bit with some Hellions and his actual army, so it looks like he's going to be taking some map control and actually asserting dominance on the map. We go to the unit counting station. Fluffy's got a 10 SCV lead, the same amount of Hellions for both players. Red Death has 1 additional Viking, same amount of tanks, and pretty close to the same amount of Marines, so I would almost have to chalk it up that Fluffy's way is a little bit more efficient, but I wasn't able to scrutinize Red Death's macro as much as I wanted to. Now both players are taking kind of a wide berth, actually taking the close watchtower to both players. Fluffy actually landing his Vikings to mop up the Hellions that are right there. Now Red Death beelining into Fluffy's base, which Fluffy's doesn't really have a whole lot of units to be able to actually defend this. Red Death's taking up some siege mode down there and actually doing some volleys down on this refinery and actually denying mining at this expansion. All these SCVs decide to run away. Now Turret's going to be able to chase away those Vikings slightly, but Fluffy actually doing the same thing to Red Death, actually volleying and utilizing the space right here to be able to actually siege Red Death's orbital, and with a Viking shot actually loses it. Now Fluffy is able to get his orbital command out of there, but he's going to be losing sky, his dominance in the sky as 4 Vikings from Red Death take out the small amount that are back from Fluffy. Now Fluffy being smart, doing some long distance mining and actually going to reestablish his base down here, but he's going to have to worry about this contain that Red Death has on him. Now, Red Death being a little bit too A little bit too ballsy with those siege tanks, actually taking some damage now. Fluffy can't see that siege tank, or he's not quite in the range, but almost takes it out. Actually sending a Hellion down and frying it with some fire, so... And Fluffy coming down with a flank from the back and actually going to be taking out these units. And a lot of these Marines go down, even with the stim and running, it's just not quite enough. And with pressing in from both sides, it looks like he's going to be able to break the ground contain. And it looks like Fluffy's going to be able to just barely break this contain in the air and be able to clean it up and take a 16 supply lead. Now, while this has been going on, Fluffy actually taking a third down, what would be considered a fourth base, which is very difficult for him to contain, and TheRedDeath actually able to secure his, what would be his third base, but he's going to have to rebuild both of these bases in order to be able to be successful. So if we look at the income rate, Fluffy's taken a huge lead and is going to be able to utilize this properly. Even with exchanging right now, as long as Fluffy can keep his macro up, he'll be okay. Now we see the battalion, or the flock of siege tanks actually working on these destructible rocks. And if Fluffy can be able to retake this base right here and be able to make sure that contain doesn't happen again, it looks like that Fluffy's in a commanding lead. It's going to be very difficult for TheRedDeath to be able to get back into this. Oh, I love the music. As we go in town on the slow boat of the game, as we see Fluffy add on an additional starport, there's the biggest thing to kind of note as we see these Marines duke it out. I love the twang that kind of happens here in a minute. We see TheRedDeath come out with another small battalion of units, siege mode enabled, and takes out that Marine, and it looks like his arm flew all the way over there. I love the physics in this game, and it looks like they're only going to get better in HOTS. Now TheRedDeath starting stim and producing 5 Marines at a time, and we see some more mech focus from Fluffy, which would be accurate. He's actually lifting off his barracks. He doesn't need it anymore. So we saw a Marine tank Viking opening from Fluffy, but he's actually transitioning into pure mech, which I really like this. If Fluffy can utilize the Hellions to actually be a buffer against those Marines and actually keep his Viking count up, we're in for an interesting game, guys. Now TheRedDeath utilizing some siege tanks to prevent any kind of drive-bys from Fluffy. And Fluffy deciding maybe it's worth it, but decides to pull out. Now we see a small group of Marines, tanks, and Vikings coming in, actually going to clean out this 4th and take out a lot of those SCVs. So it looks like that Fluffy's under some fire. But the thing is that if Fluffy can get this SCV back, or this SCV finish this command center and get most of these guys transferred back, Fluffy's still in a commanding league with units, and we see a drive-by right here. He decides that it's worth it to run in with these tanks, actually breaking the siege mode right here, and TheRedDeath actually utilizing, or losing a lot of his infrastructure right here. So TheRedDeath's definitely back on his back foot, actually taking about a 45 food supply difference. Now Fluffy also not in a position to be able to hold that. TheRedDeath decides that he's going to take the position up here and actually make a lot of these SCVs transfer. These Hellions driving right on in and taking a lot of siege tank fire, but there's really not a whole lot here, because most of Fluffy's siege tanks are right up here. So Fluffy's orbital command is down to 10 HP and actually gets shot down as the Vikings land right here and actually mop up all these units. So some good exchanges being done by both players, and Fluffy's still taking about a 30 food lead. Also leading about 6 SCVs, so he's still leading the worker count. We go down to mining bases. TheRedDeath literally has not very many patches of minerals left in his main, and neither does Fluffy. So both players are pretty much mining from one base. TheRedDeath with a small blunder of having some SCVs that aren't mining properly, and a Vespine geyser that's not being used very well. Fluffy looks like he wants to hold that ground while TheRedDeath's trying to reestablish that base. See some Hellions and Vikings moving around on the map, and we see a trail of units here and there going by, so it looks like Fluffy's making a stand. He's saying, nope, you're not going to be able to take this base, TheRedDeath. That's not going to happen. Now, utilizing the orbital command that's right here to be able to provide some vision properly. Scanning right there. I'm not sure who scan that was. It probably was Fluffy's, but it looks like he's losing it. Actually driving his Hellions right up right there, and a gaggle of Vikings coming in, actually taking out a lot of the air control that's available for RedDeath. And all he has to do is just look just a little bit to the right, and he'll see an orbital command just floating up there. Now Fluffy actually taking the low ground and utilizing some scans up there to be able to do some damage. RedDeath deciding that, whoops, I need to get the hell out of here. So with this contain and the one Viking, RedDeath's actually going to have to leave, and he really doesn't have a whole lot of effective mining, but he's able to clean that up and actually take out a lot of the Marines that are right here, but actually losing a lot of his siege tanks as well. So RedDeath able to reestablish that base by landing, but at what cost? Fluffy is now back up to 3 bases, actually morphing a planetary fortress to be able to lock that down. Actually pressing forward to the main base, utilizing the Vikings that are right here, and the Viking count is just too great for Fluffy. Actually mopping out all these units that are right here, taking out that medevac that's being able to reinforce, and there's just a gaggle of Marines that are just kind of taking pot shots at the Vikings, but they can't get really too close because Fluffy's siege tanks are right there. So RedDeath actually, with his 3rd orbital, not going to be able to do much. Actually, with a... might have been a mistake actually taking some SCVs to take some siege tank fires for RedDeath, and actually able to clean up that contain. So there's just one sneaky Hellion laying in the back for Fluffy, and RedDeath's actually able to break that contain. Now Fluffy takes most of his Air Force and runs home. We got one Viking from RedDeath going, "Die, Vikings!" He actually stemmed. He really wants those Vikings to die, and was able to take an additional Viking down, which I guess is worth it. So effectively, we have RedDeath mining on one base, over mining from one of his refineries, and he's getting additional pressure from Fluffy. So Fluffy not giving RedDeath a moment to breathe, actually just locking it back down here. But the battalion of siege tanks that are right here are locking down any kind of ability for them to be able to hold it. We see the Hellions right up there exchanging, so Fluffy doing a good job of making sure that RedDeath really can't get back in this game. Even making 5 Marines at a time, it's just not going to be enough. We see the Hellion up here finally seeing that this orbital landed and decided to fry the orbital that's right here after it gets taken out. So we see that RedDeath is effectively on 2 bases and only 1 gas, even though he's banking about 1,000. We see Fluffy on about 3 bases and 3 proper bases, where Fluffy's about to get his 4th up. Fluffy also taking about a 20 worker lead against RedDeath as well. So Fluffy is in a commanding lead, and it is his game to lose. Checking out the upgrades, that's something that I have been missing. We see +1 vehicle weapons for Fluffy. And going back to RedDeath, we see nothing for him. We also see no additional upgrades, so it just looks like that Fluffy is deciding to exchange and make sure that RedDeath really can't have room to breathe, but right now it's just room to breathe. We see some Marines down here actually locking it down, and what happened to this base? Did it get cleaned up? I guess I missed it. I apologize, guys. See a small battalion of Marines, tanks, and a medevac over here. We see Fluffy with a Hellion kind of close by. Now Fluffy's building an additional base, kind of closer to home, so it's not as remote. We see exchange going down and actually mopping up all of those Marines and actually getting in so that the siege tank can't utilize a lot of the splash damage that's available to him. Now, the thing though is that siege tanks are able to take fire pretty well. So as you can see, it takes a while for him to be able to lock that down. Now the RedDeath also trying to build a 4th base, be able to get back into this game, and research. And looks like it's transitioning to a more, I guess, bio kind of style, getting concussive shells, getting +1 infantry weapons and vehicle weapons, and actually adding on marauders of his own. Thor is also on the way out. So RedDeath doing more of a, well, I guess it's still mech, but with a bio complement. Now we see an engagement in the middle, and it looks like Fluffy's able to get the siege tank or siege mode up first, and it looks like RedDeath's siege mode isn't able to do a whole lot. See a lot of engagement going on, and Fluffy actually landing his Vikings on top of the siege tanks, And that's an excellent exchange for Fluffy, actually, now since he's up about 50 or 60 food. That's definitely the kind of exchanges that you want. Now RedDeath's stimming up, see what kind of exchange he can do, and he's actually taking out most of those tanks. Only one remains, but the Vikings land and clean most of that up. And we have one siege tank up, actually about to start shelling on the command center, but it looks like the Thor and the Marines and Marauders that are right here are going to be able to clean that up pretty well. Look at all that blood that's down there. That's awesome. Now we see Fluffy with a scan from RedDeath actually looking like he's going to clean up or successfully establish that base. And the one thing I really like is that he's still building SCVs. He's about up to 59 SCVs with a couple more on the way, still leading RedDeath's 45. So if you're in RedDeath's position, what would you do in order to be able to get back into this game? Utilizing some drops to be able to lock it down. The thing about mech is that it's very immobile. So, you know, Fluffy has to pretty much uproot whatever he's doing, go to your base and actually lock it down. So he's actually doing a good job of making sure that there's lots of tanks there to be able to just obliterate whatever's going on. But the Viking count is all bunched up. Now, you want to be able to drop right here to be able to harass this base or be able to sneak one right around here. You want to make sure to keep the immobile player actually on his feet, so he has to be more centralized. Fluffy getting +2 vehicle weapons and adding 4 more siege tanks to his ranks. If I was Protoss, I'd just go DTs. So we see a Marauder and a Hellion duking it out. It looks like the Marauder wins. But Fluffy looks like he's actually going to take some additional map control. RedDeath's battalion of infantry units stems and runs up, seeing what other kind of things they can clean up. But the Marines are being mopped down, and just from standard tank fire, so these tanks are being able to line them up. All those SCVs that are transferring! It's a disaster! Fluffy in a commanding lead with about 80 food or 80 supply ahead. 30 of that supply being SCVs, and it looks like that Fluffy is taking up siege mode right here, and it looks like he's going to shell this planetary fortress, and to be brutally honest, there's not a darn thing RedDeath can do about it. He's got a small battalion of Marines, Marauders, and tanks, but with the established position that Fluffy has, this base has gone down. Now it looks like RedDeath utilizing that position, but he sees in his vision that these units are actually lining up. Marauders deciding to stem, actually take whatever kind of pot shots they can, but it's just not going to be enough. The unit and tank count is just too high. Now Fluffy deciding to siege mode right here, and the Marauders running up and stemming a little bit, but Fluffy is at 197 supply. We see a small battalion that actually takes out this base over here, but going back up to RedDeath's base, there's nothing he can do to be able to lock this down. Lifting it up is only going to result in an instant death by those Vikings, and losing that base is detrimental. RedDeath is effectively down to no mining. He's only mining about 224 gas from both of these refineries, and RedDeath is pretty much red dead. We see some tanks being able to actually do some pot shots, and a small battalion of Marines and Marauders coming back to actually clean it up, but you're 102 food down, and most of your food is over here, and you don't have the ability to really retake a base, so it's just a matter of time. Fluffy siege mojing with his +2 vehicle weapons and shelling everything in this base. Locking that down, the Vikings actually come up, and RedDeath taps out with a GG. So nicely done, Fluffy. I really like that your opening. I mean, if we assume that both players' openings were just as efficient, your opening with the 1-1-1 was more efficient, being able to get a higher Marine and tank count out in the open. RedDeath just got dead. Both of you guys did a good contain at the same time, but you were able to break his, and he wasn't able to bounce back from it. So GG, man.